Well, welcome for today's seminar. Before we do start, please be aware of the exit signs in case we need to leave the room for some emergency. For those that are on the internet, we strongly suggest for the Q&A that you send your email questions to us at first opportunity so that we have time to take them on the air. So with that, Nesanami.
Thank you, Peter. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming today. My name is Nesamani Kalandur, and I'm the Manager of Transportation Analysis Section at ARB. Dr. Ritchie is the PI for this project, but he's unable to make it today. So, however, I would like to introduce Dr. Andre Talk. He's the co-PI of this project. He's here with us today. Hi, Andre. So I know Andre for almost 14 years now. So Andre is currently Assistant Project Scientist at the University of California, Irvine Institute of Transportation Studies. He's really passionate about the advanced detection technologies and freight transportation data. Andre's research was the first one to investigate inductive sensor data to obtain truck body classification data. So he was as part of his research, he started this process, and now it's really went further down, and it's in real-world implementation right now. So he's going to talk about it today later. Andre's research. Andre was also a lead researcher in the development of statewide freight forecasting model, which many of you might have heard about it or used it earlier. So, and then he was also instrumental in integrating weigh-in motion and inductive signature technology to advance truck body classification. Currently, Andre is the project manager for Caltrans funded project, which is going to implement this new system to more than 90 locations throughout the major corridors in the state. So it's an ongoing project right now. We'll share that project as well with us today. Today, Andre is going to talk about development and demonstration of truck activity monitoring system. In this presentation, is going to discuss about the inductive sensor, loop sensor data and its application in getting the collect the high resolution truck activity data and that. So with that, please help me to welcome Dr. Andre Talk.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Nesamani, for that very flattering introduction. Before I start, I just want to take the opportunity to just mention that we really appreciate this, this unique relationship that we have as a university with the state public agencies, the California Air Resources Board and Caltrans, and it's with this collaboration that we have taken this research thus far, from what's initially was just exploratory research to to a point where we're actually seeing real world implementation that's actually seeing benefits not just to the public agencies, but I've heard to even other private consultants as well. So today I'm going to be giving you an overview of this study, hopefully to let you appreciate firstly, the effort that's been taken to develop this product, but more importantly, how you can use it, in your field of work, and hopefully find benefits and provide us a feedback on how we can even further improve it for your applications. And before I go into the presentation proper, I just want to show you two slides just to get you warmed up. The first is just a picture of a slide of a dozen or so different type of truck configurations out there. And these are just the drive units. And next, you've got the trail units that are pulled by some by trucks, others by tractors. And one thing that hits home is just the amount of diversity of trucks that are out there. These types of trucks, they are distributed, the activity are distributed spatially and temporally. They're not unique by location, by time of day. And also, the other thing that you'll note is that they're very different from passenger cars in that, if you see a passenger vehicle or SUV, you don't really know what it's up to. It's probably a work trip, social trip, whatever. But if you see a truck, and you can characterize, if you know the configuration of the truck, you have some ideas of what kind of activities it's probably going to be engaged with. If it's a logging truck, it can't be going to the refinery. If it's an enclosed van, it's probably not going to the ports. Likewise, if you see a 40-foot container, that's an intermodal box container, it's probably either heading to one of the ports or it's coming from a port. So having that information is very enriching. It tells you what's impacting the roads today, either environmentally or in the infrastructure, or even economically. So let's talk about what are the existing truck data sources out there right now, and I've broken them into 3 main categories. The first are your mobile sources. These are probably the newest sources out there. They're mainly GPS data that can be purchased from what I'm aware of, and from the American Transportation Research Institute. And another emerging data source is your cell phone data. And because cell phone data is location-based, you can use that, you can dig into that and tease out the pings that are associated with truck activity. If that they start from one facility to another, there's some ways to get information there. Next is the more conventional static or count data. And California has got about 100 weigh-in-motion sites now that are continuously collecting data for the state. There are also automatic vehicle classifier systems, and these systems are, they use axle sensors, so they can be used to categorize trucks by axle configuration. And third are your surveys. So in 2002, that was the last time the feds conducted a national vehicle inventory and use survey, and that gave us an idea of the types of the inventory of truck types out there, and what the activity is like at the national level. But these are, one-time surveys. And California recognizes this need, and in fact, it's currently, I believe Caltrans is currently sponsoring a separate project to conduct our own California Vehicle Inventory and Use Survey to find out, how trucks from actually all over the U.S., not just within California, are using California roads and how they're impacting our infrastructure and economy. So all this data is great, but and the only caveat is that none of these are giving us a good feel, a good sense of what's the overall truck activity on a day-to-day basis in California that's freight related. Axle classification information from WIM sites, from AVC sites are great, but as you can probably think, axle configuration doesn't really tell us much about freight movement. Some trucks are predominantly service oriented. Some are, and many of them are freight. And it doesn't tell us what type of commodities or industries those trucks may be affiliated with. So as we started out this research, I thought, what if we could develop a new system that is cutting edge, yet sustainable because it uses existing detector infrastructure. We're not building new stuff. We're not spending a ton of resources trying to build something from the ground up. But yet it's able to provide detailed truck count data using advanced inductive signature technology. So, it all began, as somebody briefly mentioned about it, about 10 years back when I was still a grad student figuring out research. I was down at the San Onofre truck scales setting up temporary sensors These were called blade inductive sensors. And it collected inductive signatures. It's very similar to the loop sensors that you have all over the state, but it's just a different geometric configuration. And with this, I was able to collect data and basically show that, hey, there is potential in using inductive signatures to distinguish truck configurations. The only caveat was that this is a prototype, so we can't really expand this statewide. So it was pretty much just a research investigation. Well, fast forward 2011, 2012, that's when we were in communications with the California Air Resources Board. They had a need for truck data. And from our communications, we found that areas such as the Central Valley was lacking truck activity data. And they approached us to find out if we could come up with a solution for that. And we thought, hey, maybe it's time to relook into this inductive signature technology. I knew it worked with blades. And I knew that, well, to some degree, it probably would work with the regular sensors, the conventional sensors we have on our roadways today. I just didn't know what the level of success was. So I wasn't promising too much, but I think, hey, let's look into that. And as part of the project, because ARB wanted some tangible data, we had a component of the research that involved deployment as well, which is unlike typical research where you just end up with some theoretical formulations and stop right there. So we actually ended up with 16 deployed locations in San Joaquin Valley. And most of them are still collecting data, except for, I think, 3 of the weigh in motion sites we had to basically take them down because they were doing some hardware upgrades. But for the most part, everything's still up and running. And then after that study concluded, Caltrans saw the product and they felt that there was potential to expand this to a statewide level because during that time, we had also, UCI had the privilege to develop the California statewide freight forecasting model. It's a statewide tool, really a national tool, but focused on California that allows you to play different policy scenarios, economic scenarios, and find out what the impacts would be on freight traffic on the infrastructure. The problem, as I mentioned to you, that there's so little truck data to help to calibrate and validate the model. We did the best that we could to develop that model, but we knew that there was still room for improvement if we could get the data to feed the model. So that was the main motivation to get to, for this follow-up study. And part of this effort also would be focused on enhancing the model that was developed during the in the ARB contract. And this deployment would cover over 90 locations at 3 strategic types of locations. The first are your state borders, so you know what types of trucks, not just the number of trucks, but the types of trucks that are entering and leaving the state. The second are at locations at the interregional cordons, so you want to know the trucks traveling between metropolitan areas. And lastly, we also want to instrument some strategic corridors within the metropolitan areas just to get a feel for how trucks are, by different industries are choosing their routes within the metro areas. So then, so as a product of that research, we're developing what's called the truck activity monitoring system. And basically, it's a product that we want to be able to share with the public, agencies, public and private. So some of the features of TAMS, for short, is that it's temporally continuous. So it's not like you survey one time where you get, maybe truck activity for a week. This is ongoing. The sites that we've deployed, even from a year back, they've been continually collecting data. It's spatially representative. As I mentioned to you at the conclusion of this project, we will have over 90 locations. We're at about the halfway mark now. We have about 45 sites that are currently deployed, and most of them are streaming live data. Third, it's sustainable. The investments have already been made to construct your weigh in motion sites, your inductive loop detector sites. Most of the costs have been already invested. It's a small marginal cost to add on to these sites to convert a system that currently only does vehicle counts. It doesn't distinguish trucks. It doesn't distinguish any vehicle types, to one that now is able to distinguish over 40 different types of trucks. So it's a whole different paradigm. I mean, I'm still thinking of what are the potential applications for such a rich data source, and I'm looking for feedback myself. And fourth, it's an advanced system. It uses inductive loop technology, inductive loop signature technology, and it's combined with weigh in motion technology where available at weigh in motion sites. And as I mentioned earlier, it's high fidelity because as far as my knowledge goes, I don't think there's any other system, especially one that leverages existing invested infrastructure that produces over 40 different types of trucks at inductive loop sites. And at weigh in motion sites, because we have the added benefit of having axle measurements, the combination of inductive loop signatures and axle measurements allow us to distinguish over 60 different types of trucks. And lastly, we're making it accessible and automated. So we have it hosted on an interactive GIS web-based user interface. So all of you can go back to your office, type in the URL, and you can see the data that's been that's as recently collected as yesterday, and that's fully automated. So the potential applications, it all boils down to a better understanding of truck travel patterns and behavior. But if you think about it, if by knowing truck configurations, you know which trucks are carrying freight and which ones are not. So you have much better numbers to work with freight movements versus non-freight movements. You get a much better idea of what the temporal and spatial travel behavior of trucks by industries are. For example, from my data, I found out that, hey, I can find out, I know what time of day the UPS and FedEx trucks are traveling now, when the construction double dump trailers are traveling and what time of day. And I'll show that later in the live demonstration. Because we also classify the tractor units that are pulling the trailers, we can tell if they have a sleeper cab or not. And in fact, we were privileged to be able to be awarded a contract to conduct the pilot CalVias survey. Our results indicated that if you knew just that piece of information, whether a tractor has a sleeper cab or not, you know fairly confidently if it's involved in long or short haul travel. So if you think about the potential there, if you know what kind of a tractor configuration it has, what kind of a trailer it's pulling, man, you have a much better idea now of what commodities are traveling the long and short haul by time of day and by industry. Also, when this system is implemented at weigh in motion sites, remember at weigh in motion sites we have got sensors that detect axle weights. So together with body configuration now, we can specifically find out what are the actual empty factors associated by specific truck categories, industries, and commodities. So for example, I can zero in on tank trailers and find out how often what proportions of the counts are empty movements and what proportions are full. So there are two main detector technology solutions that were implemented. As I mentioned earlier, we've got at weigh in motion sites, a combination of both the technologies, way in motion and inductive signatures. And in the vast majority of inductive loop sites, we're just using standalone inductive signature technologies to develop our models. Just a brief overview for those of you who may not be quite as familiar with way in motion. So at these locations, of which we have about 200 in California or so, but 100 of them are actively collecting data. The others are more used for enforcement at a static scales. At least in California, this would be the typical configuration. You've got bending plates that are straddled before and after by inductive loop sensors. So the bending plates measure the axle weights, and the loops help to detect the presence so that if 5 axle measurements go by, the system knows, oh, all these 5 axles belong to a single truck rather than maybe a passenger car and a separate 3-axle truck. So that's how the system works in tandem. And so with this, it's able to provide speeds of the vehicles or trucks, the lengths and axle spacings, and all this information can be used to provide the FHWA 13 classification scheme. And in California, we use a modified 14 vehicle classification scheme. And inductive signatures basically, it's like putting in your inductive loop sensors on steroids. In the conventional mode, the inductive loop detectors that are out there in over 8,000 locations in California now, they're bivalent in operation. So they create a binary pulse whenever a vehicle goes over it. So it's like a series of ones and zeros. And then you can count the number of pulses to find out how many vehicles are there. You can measure the width of the pulse, the duration of the pulse to kind of estimate, maybe the traffic conditions and so forth. But what inductive signatures does is it measures the analog change of the inductive signal as a vehicle goes over it. And this gives us very detailed information. It's just a metal detector that senses the presence of the distribution of metal along the chassis of the truck. And that's what allows us to distinguish the trucks in such level detail. And just to give you an appreciation of the potential here are 6 different types of trailer configurations. And if all these 6 trucks were to drive over a way in motion site or an automatic vehicle classification site, they will all be reported as a Class 9 5-axle tractor trailer. But you can see here, right here, even visually, that the signatures that they generate are very unique. So right at the outset, we knew there was that potential to distinguish them using some various pattern recognition algorithms. And even beyond vehicle classification, with UCI in the last decade and a half, 2 decades, has been actively investigating inductive signature applications. And these are some of them. We've used them to match vehicles from point to point, so we can get travel time information. Of course, now there's GPS, so that's maybe somewhat less relevant. We can get accurate single loop point speeds. The practitioners know that to get accurate speeds, we typically need 2 loops as a speed trap. So you measure that, the difference in time actuations, and by knowing the spacing between the 2 sensors, you can find out what the speeds are. Well, with inductive signatures, we can get accuracies that are equivalent to double loop speeds with just the use of a single loop. We can also get a better measure of section-based traffic densities and emissions, because we know the speeds that vehicles are traveling across a section, and we know the types of vehicles they are by category. So we know we can have different emissions profiles tied to the different vehicle types and the speeds, and as a result, provide emissions estimates. So this gives you an idea of the potential other collateral benefits from having this infrastructure in place. We may be investing them now for truck classification, but after it's in place, we could easily tag in some of these other benefits, because now now these technologies already in place on the roadways. So next I want to talk about the model development. And the illustration I can think of is a monkey. All right, and there are two main tasks in developing a good model. Academics are very good at developing fancy algorithms. But that's just one component. So that's like making the monkey smart, putting a good brain into him, right? So he doesn't make mistakes. But the other important part that a lot of research is lacking, at least in the area of vehicle classification, is a good, robust data set. And the analogy is this: if I train a really smart monkey, and all I do is put him out in the desert, and let's say the task here is to recognize the different types of trees. I put him in the Mojave Desert where there's lots of Joshua trees and yuccas and whatever. And then I decide to, take him to the high Sierras, and he sees a giant sequoia. He's going to say, wow, that's a really huge Joshua tree. So right at the outset, you recognize this significant component in the research, and that's why we embarked on a very, at least in my opinion, a very ambitious data collection effort. In fact, from my knowledge, it's probably the largest effort ever taken to identify, to collect trucks, a large data set of just trucks in, 4 diverse locations in California. And we collect inductive signatures, we collect the weigh in motion data, and a still image of each truck, so we can visually recognize it. You can see there might be an animation. So we can have a database of all these truck configurations, and then get the grad students to slowly input all the data. So they're sitting hours on end. We developed a custom advanced user interface, and if you look at the top left screen there of the screen, they are manually detailing the observations, what kind of a truck it is, the axle configuration, the drive unit configuration, and the tractor configuration. And we actually used the National VIAS of 2002. The VIAS has a scheme of truck trailer configurations. We started with that, and we actually expanded on it. So we have dozens of configurations specified for each truck. So it really is a truck survey in itself. This effort here at these 4 locations in California that covered the agricultural industry in Fresno, the logging industry up in Redding, and the metropolitan areas, represented by our data collection in Irvine. So with this data, then we developed the 2 systems of body classification models. The inductive loop signature only model for inductive loop sites, and the integrated model that uses weigh in motion and inductive signature data for implementation at weigh in motion sites. And as you can see on the right, the figure there shows that we can use, because we have axle spacing, we can even use it to tease out the part of the signature that belongs to the trailer and the tractor for individual analysis. And as a result, we arrived at this really, it's not just a model, I call it a system of models, because each of those boxes, from the second row down, the second and the third row, each of those boxes represent an individual model. So you don't have just one monkey; you have a whole team of them working, in tandem, and even more than that, we've got for some of these models, for example, the single unit truck on the left, tier 2, and maybe I should use my pointer here. This one here, the single unit truck, and the tractor with semi-trailer that produces 13 and 19 classes, as well as many of the FHW classes here. Each of these FHW classes has got a model assigned to it, and they produce between 10 to 16 classes. So many of these classes, many of these models, it wasn't just a standalone model too. We use what's called an ensemble, so a panel of models. So think of it, one analogy is hurricane models. You know, as you know, there are lots of hurricane tracking models out there, and all of them gives a different prediction. Likewise, we're aware also that different mathematical models tend to have different biases. So we implemented what's called an ensemble, where we actually have up to 4 models reading the same data, giving its own prediction. So one uses a multi-layer feed-forward model, one uses a Bayesian model, one uses a decision tree, and another uses a support vector machine. And we found that each of those tend to be strong in some classes and weak in others. And so they give their own predictions, and then you got a head honcho monkey looking at the results and say, if this is, so he takes all the votes and he decides. He knows the strengths and weaknesses of each of these monkeys, and he can tell, okay, if this is what they say, then the history, my knowledge of these guys tells me that it should really be this vehicle that they're seeing. So on to the results. We've got, first we have 4 main categories of, we distinguish the cars from the trucks, and then among the trucks we've got 4 main categories that break down into 47 truck body classes. Right now, about 34 classes have an accuracy of 70% and higher. 27 classes have a volume error of 10% or less, according to our test data. And we're in the process of improving that. Now, if you just want a simple breakdown of the 5 categories shown in this table, we can give it to you at over 90%, I think about 95% accuracy, if that's all what you want. But the more, as you would imagine, the more detail you try to get, the higher the errors are. So for example, in the tractors with semi-trailer, if you want to have that category broken down to the 19 component body configurations, we have an average accuracy of about 75% right now, which we're still in the process of improving. And for the tractors with multiple trailers, well, in the case of California, we have double trailers. We've got 7 classes that we've identified with in this category, and because the double trailers are typically much more well-defined, there's much less heterogeneity, we actually have an accuracy of about 90% in getting them correct. This shows you the breakdown of the 19 classes, the types of trailers under the semi-tractor trailer category. And they range, from as low as 46% accuracy up to over 90%. But think of this as the baseline, all right? This is what was accomplished. We're working to improve that. So this is as bad as it gets. One more thing I want to point out to you is that we can even distinguish the refrigerated vans from the non-refrigerated vans. And speaking here among the, well, at least the ARB crowd, most ARB crowd in at least in audience here, I think those implications are significant too, because if you think about it, well, you probably know better than me, is that when these trucks stop at the rest stops, if they have a refrigerated van, they have to keep that running to keep the commodities fresh. So if you have that breakdown, that tells you, gives you a better idea of the emissions implications or even the fuel consumption implications that maybe the California Energy Commission might be interested in. For the integrated WIM signature model, we first break them down using axle information provided by the weigh in motion sensors to the FHWA classes. And then within these individual axle-based classes, we further break them down to the body by body configuration. So that leads us to over 60 body classes. 52 of them have an accuracy of over 70%, and about 37 of them have a volume accuracy of or error rate of less than 10%. And zooming into the class 9 semi-tractors, you can see that we are breaking down what's previously only known as 5-axle trucks into all these detailed configurations. And we can tell you if it's an enclosed vent, if it has a refrigerated unit associated with it, if it's a 40-foot box container that's, very likely coming from or going to a port. If it's a 53-foot container, it's probably heading to or coming from a rail yard, because those are domestic intermodal boxes. We can tell you if it's a logging truck even, because remember we set up our data collection up in Reading, so we actually observe those trucks. And various other configurations. And so for those of you who are starting to get excited about this, you might start asking the question, so what does it take to implement a system such as this? So that's what we've been focusing on as well in these two research contracts. We developed the solution on the server side that does all the processing. So everything's centralized. So all it takes in the field is to swap out the existing detector cards that are already out there with these new detector cards that are functionally the same. They still send the same data to the TMCs. So operations are not compromised. In fact, we have 45 locations that are currently being implemented, and so far what I'm hearing is that there are no compromises to traffic operations. Except for, I was out at one location yesterday where the detector cards actually failed. So, that is, I guess, a hardware issue. And we have a fanless field computer that's connected to these cards via a USB interface, and that's what pulls in the signature data. So on the back end, the cards still send traffic detection information to the traffic controllers and communicate to the TMCs, but on the front panel of the cards, we get the signature data, we process it, send it live to our servers, where they're temporarily archived, and at about 3 in the morning, we process all those 2 million, currently about 2 million records daily, classify them, summarize them, and make them available on our website. And the communications is performed currently through a wireless modem, though at some point I think it'll be neat if we can leverage the existing communication infrastructure that's already in place at many of these cabinets. These are the type of sites that we've deployed them. First on the left, that's a weigh motion site. These are the solution there. It's a little less straightforward. We had to develop a custom interface to the detector cards because they were not directly compatible. Well, you know what? I have to give credit to Caltrans, specifically Stan Orikani, because he allowed us researchers to mess with the cabinet and trust us with keeping everything up and running. So we made it work. In fact, one of these sites is still up and running. It's sending us data over at on the 580 freeway right by the Tracy Triangle. We also have, most of our deployments are inductive loop signature deployments, so we use existing inductive loop cabinets. And there are 3 types of setups out there. Not all of them are the same. Some of them are for ramp metering purposes, and we've shown that our systems work even without compromising ramp metering operations. We've got them at traffic monitoring sites. So these sites feed the PAM system, for those of you who are familiar with PAMs, with count data and traffic conditions. So those systems are still doing that while feeding us our inductive signature data. And lastly, we have them at Census AVC sites, where we have them in tandem with the piezo sensors. And so these sites are still collecting their Excel classifications for the districts while sending us our inductive loop signature data for classification. And this schematic here just shows how the data is transmitted to our server. At the inductive loop sites, it just sends data through a secure tunnel. At weigh in motion sites, it sends both weigh in motion data and signature data to our messaging server, which then loads it into our database. So next, I'm going to give you a live demo. to show you how it is in operation. So this is a list here of all the sites that we have deployed. Most of them are running, as you can see, with the flashes. Every time you see a flash corresponding to those rows, which correspond to an implemented site, that's a vehicle that has just been detected real time. A few of them are down, and I'm in the process of getting them back online. But for the most part, you can see they are all running live. This is not yesterday or a month ago. This is as we're talking, as we're speaking. We can go down to the, and before I forget, most of these sites, we only implement detection on the truck lanes or the too slow lanes. And that's just because of the budget constraints that we have. We want to focus on the trucks. But it can be easily expanded to the non-truck lanes as well. And in fact, that might be a good, that might be good to pursue in the future, because we do observe that there are some corridors where trucks have a higher tendency to not travel in the too slow lanes. So there are some violations there. So here's an example. I'll pick this one site down in San Diego. And then what you'll see here, this is just right by Carlsbad. And we have four lanes instrumented, 2 northbound, 2 southbound. And these are the signatures that are streaming in live to our messaging server that I'm just pulling from. When you see a simple symmetrical signature, those are your passenger vehicles, which we're not too interested in. But whenever you start seeing one of those detailed signatures, that I can tell you is a tractor trailer. It's got a tractor component and the trailer axles there, and between is the trailer chassis that our models try to tease out to find out what configuration it is. Occasionally you get lane changing vehicles, and because it's a field implementation, the data isn't perfect. If a vehicle straddles lanes, it wouldn't produce good data, just as it wouldn't even with weigh in motion or AVC installations. So, but as far as it goes, it's fairly reliable. I can just show one more location here, which is at the 710, right near the ports. Very heavy truck traffic. As you can see here, it's mostly passenger cars. And here, this location is just a couple of miles from the port, south of the 405 corridor. We've got full implementation here, 3 lanes in each direction. And now you can see a lot more tractor trailers showing up. They shouldn't be showing up much on lane 1, but occasionally they do. Those are the violators. So that's already one potential application here of this research. And you can tell what kind of industry they're affiliated with. So I'm going to stop this for now and show you the website that's publicly available, the truck activity monitoring system. And right now we have 3 different tools, different analysis tools that we have that you can use for your analysis. They're still undergoing development, so there may be some bugs occasionally here and there, but they're for the most part working. The first I'm going to show you are just the data from individual detector locations. So this map here on the right shows you all the deployments that we have. The blue dots are the inductive loop sites, the orange dots are the weigh in motion sites. So the date I'm selecting is by default is the day before, so that's July 12th, yesterday. And I'm going to pick this weigh in motion site, I-580. And the first result it gives you is a summary of the daily truck volumes by axle classes. But if you click on any of these numbers, let's say in the eastbound or westbound direction, say class 9, then what you are presented with is a detailed hourly breakdown of trucks by configuration. And I thought it was a pretty nifty idea to show you pictures of each of these truck configurations because these are not standardized schemes yet. And even when we first started out, we were asking questions. Hey, when we saw a picture, an image of a truck that was collected, what kind of a truck is that? We had to do our research to find out the appropriate definition of it. So for your benefit, now you have the picture to assist you. And it goes all the way down. And as you can see, this is an interstate corridor. So we tend to see a lot of enclosed vans, some with reefers, some without. And if you go into the, let's see, the class, maybe if you look at the class 14s, these are your trucks, straight trucks pulling a trailer. It's telling you that there's some dump truck activity there, pulling trailers. And it's typically in the early mornings, which for those of you who are familiar with the construction industry, I think that's typical. You want to haul your gravel and stuff in the early morning and get them delivered. If you look at the double trailers, you also have construction in the early morning, and then the double enclosed vans. Okay, you see some in the night here, and my suspicion those are your UPS FedEx trucks traveling from hub to hub. So at the loop sites, we don't have that much detail because we don't have axle measurements. But it still gives you a decent breakdown. So if the site I'm selecting here, I'm just going to zoom down. And for your benefit, I know a lot of you here are affiliated with state agencies, so you might be interested in your district or your air basin and so forth. So you can zoom it in. And I'm going to focus now on the Southern California Association of Governments, or SCAG. So it zooms in. I'm selecting the site near Santa Clarita on the 5. And if you look at yesterday's data, let's say the southbound direction coming into the LA metro area, guess what? We're seeing a lot of enclosed vans, again, in the night. So these are probably, I think they're made up of your UPS, FedEx type of tractor trailers. And I've also seen some fresh produce that's coming in from the Central Valley. They come with these refrigerated double trailers as well. And it seems, at least apparent from this data, that it's coming through the night to avoid the congestion. If you go down to the 605, for those of you who are familiar with Southern California, the 605 is close to a gravel facility right by the San Gabriel River. So there's a huge quarry there. And so if you look at the data, the multiple trailers, you'll start seeing that, hey, there's a lot of double belly dump trucks there. And that makes anecdotal sense. So it's agreeing, the data is making a lot of sense in that regard. If you go down to, if you look at the tractor trailers, you'll see a lot of enclosed vans, some 40-foot containers from the ports. Now, if you go straight down to the 710 freeway, right close to the port of LA and Long Beach, and you look at the single trailers there now, northbound out from the ports, you don't see as many enclosed vans. In fact, they've all but disappeared. There are just a couple hundred here and there. But now they're dominated by the 40-foot containers. I mean, I don't know if there's any other data source out there that's able to give you that sort of information. It's not perfect, as we've actually recently discovered from our validation that because we set up our initial data collection in Irvine, Fresno, Redding, and Willows, none of these locations were too close to the port. So we didn't have a huge sample size of container trucks. Some, but apparently not enough. We found out that a lot of the container trucks were being misclassified as open-top vans and I think dumps. So most of the volume counts here that you see that are attributed to these trucks are actually containers. But at the very least, we know what the errors are. And if you know your data, it's still usable. And this is the worst it's going to be. We're improving it. And because we're archiving all this data, the raw signature data, we're not just storing the classification results. We store the raw DNA. So once we have the improved models, we can reprocess data that's been archived from a year back and reprocess them to give you the improved results. So I think the potential here is immense. Likewise, I'm going to go up to the San Joaquin Valley. Well, not that one. San Joaquin Valley Air Basin, where the project initially started. If you select the 205 corridor, that's between Oakland and the Lathrop Rail Facility, you'll see that in these in these single trailers, there's also a significant volume of 40-foot containers. And you'll see the patterns are also different from the enclosed vans. The enclosed vans travel through the day and night, right? There's some tapering off, but there's still high volumes at night. For the port trucks, well, there's much less of them in the night because the ports are not in operation. So if you go further north on the I-5 past Lathrop, you find that the 40-foot containers have all but disappeared because they are in the drayage movement between the ports and the rail yard. They don't go north on the 5. Instead, what we're seeing is there are more 53-foot containers now because these are the containers that are being offloaded from the rail yard, probably to their final destination in the warehouses or other processing facility. So what are some of the implications here? So the next time, you know, well, in the event that maybe the ports go on strike again, hopefully not, you probably know what you know what the impacts are going to be now, because you know what the volumes, what portion of the volumes on the corridors are made up of trucks that are affiliated with the industry, with the affected industry. If you are a planner, you may not be quite as interested in the individual locations. What you're probably more interested are your screen lines. And so you want to know what are the number of trucks entering and leaving a region. So, you know, this is just an aggregation of locations across various boundaries. For example, if you want to know what are the number of trucks leaving LA towards the Inland Empire, San Bernardino, I can select that screen line and give you the total. You can break it down, obviously, again, by location, so you know how the truck volumes are by location, and even get a detailed breakdown of what types of trucks are crossing those individual locations. And the last tool that I developed, and probably, at least in my opinion, this is the most fanciful one, is what I call the truck shed analysis. You know, up till now, I showed you the temporal analysis, right? The time of day by location. I think it'll be neat if we can see what the spatial impacts are of industries. Don't you agree? So here, what I'm allowing you to do is select the region of interest. Let's say the San Joaquin Valley. So just zoom in there and pick the trucks you want. Let's say the intermodal 40-foot containers, like the port trucks. Where's that blue line? It's right on the 205 corridor. Everywhere else on the 5 is a lot lower. That's where it's peaked. And if we have got more implementations, we can see that spatial distribution of these various industries. If I just pick the regular freight trucks, your enclosed vans, the distribution is different. You can see that the 5 now dominates because that's the main interstate corridor in that area. So this tells us that we can't just treat all trucks the same. They all have different patterns. They all have different impacts. They all use the road infrastructure differently. If I go down to the SCAG area, and now I pick out the 40-foot containers, there's some bugs here, but well, you can see now that the 710 starts to dominate the flow. But you can also tell that, hey, a lot of these port trucks that are moving inland, they're taking the 605 corridor, And among the east-west corridors, the 210, the 10, and the 60, they have a preference for the 60. If you want to know what are the movements for the domestic containers, the 53-foot containers, they're moving from a rail yard, and I think there is a large facility in the city of Commerce that's right by the 60 freeway. So I think that's why we're seeing a lot of high volume of 53-foot containers along the corridor, and it kind of disperses a little bit after that. So you can see that's a difference again, and I can give you one more example. Let's say construction and the double dump. And this tells you that the 605 dominates for this industry. And if you look at the data, that's yesterday, July 12th. That's how recent it is. So you can look at data at a new level of detail, and that's very, very recent. So that wraps up the live demo, and I'll just have a couple more slides before I conclude my presentation. So now that you've seen all this information, it gives a little bit of an indigestion because it's a new level of paradigm in truck data. I mean, we're probably even after a couple of months of being out in the field talking to various districts and agencies, I feel like I'm still at the tip of the iceberg in trying to find out the number of applications that this data can be used for. But at this point, here are some that I can think of that are collateral benefits. It's not what's motivated this study, but some of the benefits that can come up from it. The first is policy evaluation. Right now I know there's the Peer Pass program in the San Pedro Bay Ports. Some of the questions that I'm asking are, how is this affecting truck activity? Do the port trucks because now that the ports are operating at night, do they travel out further inland for their intermodal transfer because now there's less congestion at night? Or are they still offloading to the same facilities? With this data, we can find out we can get answers to that. Enforcement, as I mentioned earlier, we can find out trucks. If we put these cards in to the fast lanes as well, we can find out which trucks by industry are making those violations. Also, as I've spoken to some district folks, they alluded to me that there are some corridors, some state routes that are designated as non-bypass routes. So which means that trucks can only take those routes if their destination is along that route, like State Route 4, State Route 12. They can't use that as a shortcut to the Bay Area. So because we have trucks by configuration now, we know the land use along the route. We can tell if those trucks have business being there in the first place. And so maybe law enforcement can more specifically target those locations at times we know where the violations are highest. The third, we can look at the impacts of, we can look at impact assessment of non-recurrent events. So for example, the port goes on strike, again, as I mentioned earlier, or their freeway closures, we can now have a better idea of how it impacts freight movement in more detail. And we can also understand the industry impacts on traffic, infrastructure, and emissions, because we're now able to analyze the temporal and seasonal variations of truck impacts by industry. And lastly, I think this research could be the cornerstone in giving us more detailed truck VMT. On its own, it's just a count location. But I think with integration with truck tracking, I mentioned earlier that with truck signatures, we can try matching signatures from one location to another and find out how the routes that they're taking. It gives us a better idea of their route patterns. And also with survey studies, even though survey studies aren't complete, it's just a small sample of truckers, of truck movement, but then we might be able to get OD information of trucks by configuration from those studies, and then extrapolate that information to the count information we're getting by location to give us a better idea of what the VMTs are through this integration. And maybe with we can also tie this information with GPS or cell phone data as well to have a much more robust model for estimating VMTs. And the truth is we're just getting started. I see this, at least as a researcher, it's a platform for future research and applications. The key thing is we are archiving every single of those individual truck and vehicle signatures. So we can always look back to this day, 5 years down the road. Let's say, case in point here is, we want to know, let's say we're curious to find out in the year 2020, we want to know how has the policy of clean trucks, how effective has it been? What are the trends? We can start maybe collecting more data or processing, or getting the model to recognize maybe even trucks by model years. I don't know how effective that would be, but it might be worth exploring. And we can get the models to process through all the data that we've started collecting since last year, and that will tell us, okay, what proportion of the truck activity is now being represented by clean trucks versus maybe some older gross polluting trucks. So all this archive is going to come in really, really useful. Also, it's a work in progress. It's not a perfect system yet. Sometimes the systems do go down. We're in the process of increasing the robustness of the field deployments, decreasing the downtime. We're trying to improve the classification of accuracy of trucks. Like I mentioned to you, we're trying to have a better we're trying to reduce the confusion of the recognition of these truck signatures. So training our monkeys to be smarter. And lastly, we are also looking at implementing classification models, developing them that for state and federal agency reporting requirements. For example, the HPMS program, the traffic census program that Caltrans is involved in, so that this can provide those benefits as well. And the reason is because when I go out to the districts, to the field folks, what I'm hearing is the current technology that's used for axle classification in the districts are the piezo sensors, and they do a good job when they're working. But unfortunately, what I'm hearing, and these are not my words, is that from field experience, these sensors tend to deteriorate fairly quickly. The expected lifespan is about 5 years if they're installed properly. Otherwise, it fails even sooner than that. And every time you have to replace them, you need lane closures, new construction, and whatnot. And what if we can, use this as a replacement for that? I think it's much. I think we are giving much better account for our tax dollars. I think it's a good stewardship, because you're using one resource, one piece of infrastructure for multiple users. So that concludes my presentation for today, and I'll hand the time over to Nesamani.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. Lots of information to digest, but we'll start the question and answer session now. Maybe I'll start with the internet question, and then we will.
That's the name.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Peter. The first question on the internet is what is the best way to download large quantities of data from the website? For example, if I want to get counts by day and location for each vehicle type for several months or weeks, would I have to click through each day individually on the calendar?
Right now, that's what you'll have to do. But that tool is in the works. In fact, I'm currently developing that component of the website where you'll have a button that you can download hourly counts by month at each of these sites that you select. So it won't be the detailed 40 odd classes, but at the start, what we'll give you is the breakdown of the 5 categories of vehicles: passenger cars, single unit trucks, trucks with trailers, tractors pulling semi-trailers, and tractors pulling double trailers. We'll offer that for now because if we got you all the detail, it's going to be pretty daunting. So, and also we are fairly confident with that data right now. We know that there's over 90% accuracy in that 5 classification. But if you want to know just a quick snapshot of what's going on around, for the previous day of what the trucks by activity by industries are, you can still go back to the website for the visual results.
The next question in the audience.
Hi, my question kind of relates to the application of this information to the CSFFM. Kind of thinking, have you guys or have anybody that's been using your data looked at the impact of truck activity based on certain economic variables? So looking at how the fuel price impacts kind of truck volumes and truck activity, activity through the ports. If the ag industry has a certain sort of economic change, are you guys starting to look at that sort of?
I think we haven't had a chance to look into that yet. This data really is still very, very new, but I think that would be an excellent application for that because, we know what the fuel price data, we know what the trends are. We have continuous data here of truck volumes by day, and you can maybe start a correlation analysis to find out if there are some, observable impacts there.
Maybe the next question on the internet is from internet. Are you going to include truck stops, less fleet terminal, overnight parking, and idling behavior in your study? I think he's asking are you going to include truck stops or fleet terminal, overnight parking, and idling behavior in your study? Basically, he's asking, are you going to install these detectors in those locations?
Well, these detectors work with trucks traveling, moving over them. So we can that's a good question to bring up as well because these sensors work best when vehicles are traveling over them at a constant speed. It doesn't really matter if it's fast or slow, as long as there's no acceleration, it doesn't come to a stop, because then that starts to distort the signatures. But for the most part, because trucks are so heavy, the acceleration is not significant. So it's typically not, it doesn't typically affect the signatures unless they're physically stopped or going really, really slow over the sensors. But to address that question, I don't think it's feasible to put these sensors physically at the truck stop, maybe before or after on the freeways, but not in those facilities themselves.
Yeah, I got 2 questions for you. One is you have in the signature lots of valleys and peaks.
Yes.
Do they represent something from, in other words, if you give you the signature, can you recognize the truck? That's what I mean. Well,
I'm not that smart, but the models can, and that's what the models do. They pick up, we actually pull out data points from the signature. And what the signature features represent is that when there's a peak, it means there's a part of the truck that's really low to the ground. So it creates a higher amplitude in the signature. When there's a high clearance, like logging trucks, between the trailer axles and the drive axles, it's a very low signal. And oftentimes with traffic controllers, they lose that middle part and they think it's 2 separate vehicles. And what's neat, in fact, I should show that live demo too, that we actually picked up logging trucks on State Route 57 in Lake County, right by Clear Lake. And it even shows you that the traffic is directional because as you would imagine, in logging movement, you're moving logs only in one direction, from the logging forests to the sawmills. So they always come back empty, or actually in a different configuration. So real quick here, I'm going to pick on this location right by Clear Lake, and you'll see that this is yesterday's data. You can see logging trucks being picked up by our model. And if you look that's in the northbound direction, and in the southbound direction, you'll see that they've all but disappeared. So it's even informing us movements of the logging industry because it's been trained to recognize that specific truck configuration as well.
My second question is, how do you validate the model?
We're doing spot validations. So as a part of this Caltrans contract, we're going out to various locations to collect short collections of the truck images and compare our model results, our model predictions in this system with that. And that's how we actually found to know that, the 40-foot containers aren't doing such a good, the model's not doing such a good job recognizing the 40-foot containers, that a good proportion are being misclassified as your open-top vans or your dump trailers. But we expect that with all these spot validations in these key locations, that we will ultimately have a model that's even significantly better than what was developed under the initial pilot study.
Next question, you can take a copy for just. I'll read it out for everybody. There are several papers noting the inconsistency of the Caltrans PEM system to identify the plain category of trucks versus passenger cars. In some cases, these studies showed extreme poor data quality. For example, reporting 0 trucks per hour when many drove by, or hundreds of trucks per hour when none drove by. How are these new weigh-in motion and inductive sensor being used to augment what Caltrans is reporting in their PEMS database?
So I'm going to put my academic hat on right now. I'm quite familiar with this method that they use, and from a research perspective, I think it's great. There's some novel algorithms that they used to try to estimate truck volumes using inductive, using just your conventional inductive loop sensors. The problem is that if you see those bivalent data, there's a high potential error. What they're doing is that they're on corridors with multiple lanes, they're assuming that on the fast lanes there are no trucks there. On the slow lanes are where there are trucks. So then there's some correlation analysis to show that, okay, if there are trucks present, then you should be getting these much more occupancies for the corresponding volume counts and so forth. So from there they predict some number of trucks. The problem is, as you can see from one of my first slides, trucks come in such a large variety of configurations. You've got single unit trucks, you've got tractor trailers, they're not a fixed length. And when you just bin all trucks into one category, there's going to be errors because some trucks will generate a much higher duration than others based on the inherent length. So from an academic perspective, I think it's nice. It's a great exercise. It's a great development. But I share the same concerns in using that anywhere beyond academia. It might be a good proxy. It's probably a good proxy for the most part for truck, some kind of a truck activity. But I would be very cautious in using the numbers that are generated by that system, if that makes sense. So if you want to just look at maybe a time trend, from a year before to the current year on the same corridor, and you assume that the truck proportions, as in the proportions of trucks among the overall population of vehicles hasn't changed, well, maybe I should take that back. Well, that maybe, somewhere along those lines, maybe you can look at what the potential growths are based on the numbers that the model predicts without using the actual numbers themselves. But that's not. I don't think that system, just inherently because of the limitations of the data that it uses, are going to be able to provide the level of detail that this system that I've presented here provides you.
Hello. There we go. First off, there's so many possibilities with all this research, and I have lots and lots of questions, but I'll just ask one. It deals with the sites, the way in motion sites, and what they look like, and what are the vehicle speeds going over the sites, and how that affects basically all the measurements going along with it. It's going highway speeds, or is it going 30 miles an hour? Is it at a way station? Where are the sites located?
Well, so as you can see from the map, I can probably zoom out. They cover actually all locations, all types of locations within metropolitan areas. In LA, we've got over 10 locations currently deployed. And then you've got in the rural areas in the Central Valley. So we're getting truck counts under all conditions, congested, non-congested. And I think what you can see from the numbers tells you that this system is fairly robust. Obviously, under severe breakdown conditions, stop and go, it's going to give you some errors. I mean, I don't know if there's any system, at least pavement-based system, that would be able to overcome that inherent limitation. But for the most part, because it just uses one sensor, so the foot is just a 6-foot footprint. The likelihood of it being affected by stop and go by slower conditions or just weaving movements is going to be less than a double loop setup where with a 26-foot footprint, because you've got two sensors in tandem. Does that answer your question? It's all freeways and highways. Yeah, we haven't implemented them at arterial streets yet. And the main constraint is that, it's a different jurisdiction. You have to work with the local agencies. It's obviously a lot easier if you have to work with one parent agency, even though, there's still 12 different districts under.
The next question. To what extent does the cargo load affect the classification of trucks in this system? How do the weigh-in motion sensors account for trucks with the different loads to help classify them?
That's a very good question. So this inductive loop signature technology, it's really inductive loops with steroids. We're still detecting the chassis of the vehicle. So at least from my knowledge, the cargo or the load sits high up above the truck enough that it doesn't really affect the field of detection. So inductive signatures alone don't really tell you the weight of the trucks. It's only at locations where we have it combined with weigh in motion sensors where we can provide you truck weights. And the second question of how do the weigh in motion sensors account for trucks with different loads to help classify them? Essentially, for the most part, the weights do not come in to play in classification. It's just information that comes with the system. So now that you've got your classifications of the trucks, you can tell that what kind of weights they are affiliated with. So it's independent, but it's information that's tied to the records now that we have.
Andre, very nice presentation. Very, very nice. My question to you is, besides all these categories, how about different technologies like hybrids? Can you recognize a truck with a battery pack or a CNG truck that has a different fuel tank? Or can we go through those type of details and try to recognize them?
I would like to. We need more research. But I can't tell if we can or not, but if indeed the chassis is significantly different, that it generates a different signature profile, I don't see why not. But that means that we need to also visually recognize them from our data collection so that we can profile them differently in our data set to allow the models to recognize them. But there's definitely the potential there.
So next question, and you can hold one. So the truck activity monitoring system interface works great and is really easy to use. Is there a way to access the process data in a form that would allow for subsequent analysis on a large scale, that is emission calculations?
The answer is we're almost there. I'm in the process of developing that feature that allows you to download the data. And it should be, without sounding too ambitious, I guess in a couple of weeks that I might be able to have that feature online so you can download hourly data by site by at least the 5 aggregate classes.
Can you give the speed profile as well for that? Or?
The speed profile, not at this point. We have models, as I mentioned to you, going back to 2008, or 2009, where we developed a speed estimation model. It looks at a signature, tries to categorize it to various vehicle categories and then runs an analysis to find out what the speed is. So there's a potential of integrating that as part of the system. But I'm not sure if we have the resources to have that accomplished under this contract. But it's been done, it's just not implemented in a operating system like this yet.
First off, I saw a presentation on this a couple of years ago, and I was excited about it then. From what I've seen today, this is far beyond anything I imagined back then. I mean, this is phenomenal work that'll revolutionize a lot of models and just the data that we can pull out of this is just, I have a hard time wrapping my mind around it. And
so do I.
Yeah, and because of that, I've got one comment and one question. And my comment is the data uses I could use for that would be something completely different than someone sitting next to me. And I can't stress enough the value of an API for this. So some way that we can tease out our own information instead of having one data set we can download. Please develop an API for this. You familiar with that?
So basically you're saying that an API where someone could develop their own app that pulls in the data and processes them in their own way?
To be able to get at different parts of the data, and then we could use it differently.
I don't see why not. That wasn't the focus of the study, but I think that would be, a natural extension to this effort to make it more accessible to the public or anyone who's interested in the data.
Like instead of just a single download link where we can actually specify we're interested in this piece, this piece, this piece. But anyway, I can't stress enough of the value of an API. The question I have is, has there been any thought, because freight is not just on-road, and I'm just wondering if this technology could be expanded to off-road applications that we could passively look at freight through rail, freight through OGV or any other off-road data.
Yeah, right now off the top of my head, I don't think it can. I think the fact that the advantage and the disadvantage is that it leverages existing infrastructure. And so I really don't think there's anything existing for rail that's inductive loop based. So unfortunately, I don't see that possibly at this point, but I don't know what the future holds. Welcome.
So the next question, does the inductive loop signature indicate anything about the fuel types used by the trucks? For example, diesel versus CNG. I think similar to Sam's question.
That seems like a very common theme here. Again, I don't know enough about the truck configurations of diesel trucks and CNG trucks. And it might be worth looking into it. We don't have the, well, we'll need to collect the data and run some investigations to find out if we can do it, how accurate it's going to be, and if it is, then great, we can, piggyback the system here and just add another application onto it for those who are interested. But at this point, I'd say I think there's great potential for it. It's just not looked into at this point.
So Andre, it's great to see this come to fruition. Been following it from the beginning too. I see at the top you have the row for passenger vehicles. I can't really read the column. Is it also called out in the grid there?
So we distinguish passenger vehicles from the trucks, but we haven't developed the models to recognize different types of passenger vehicles.
No, I don't, even different type, just total count.
Yes, so these are the total counts by direction. If you click on it, you get the hourly.
Oh, you can get hourly from
You'll get the hourly breakdowns there. So you still get the volumes by time of day for passenger vehicles.
That's great. Second sort of companion part of that, have you done anything to compare the totality of trucks and passenger cars to the associated PEMS data collection at those sites where you're near?
Sorry, can you repeat your question again?
So have you compared the totality of different truck types plus passenger vehicles from the signatures to the data collected at a nearby PEMS site?
I haven't compared. In fact, these sites that we've implemented will be the same sites that send data to PEMS. So they are the same data essentially. I don't expect to be any significant differences.
Right.
Sure. Yeah.
So we need some monkeys for that.
I'm sorry?
Need some monkeys for that.
We probably need some monkeys for that, yeah. We have sensors on the fast lane. They're just not instrumented as part of this system. So you have to look at the lane totals, not the directional totals. At some locations, we do have them implemented across all lanes, but for the vast majority, it's just the truck lanes.
Next question. How about sampling emissions at the truck check sites and correlating emission data to truck type?
I say, why not? Yeah, if you can put emission sensors right at the cabinets where we have our systems set up, I mean, that might be a good exploratory analysis to find out if we can draw some correlations, of emissions to truck activity, even by industry.
Okay, these inductive loop sites, how much radiation is coming out of those?
I would say almost nothing.
Is almost nothing? How do you guys know how much radiation is coming out of those sites?
Like, what I do know, that's not my field of training, but what I do know, these cards are so low power, they take less than, just I guess a couple milliamps, a couple of watts.
Okay, when you say inductive loop sites, what does that refer to?
The inductive loop detector sites, these are locations along the freeway that are instrumented, where you have these inductive loop sensors. We just basically turns of wire that are embedded on the roadway, in the roadway, and they're all existing. And what the hardware does is it powers these loops to detect the metal objects that drive over them. And the field, as I'm aware of, is very, very low. And this implementation doesn't change that radiation.
Is that passive detector?
Sorry?
Passive, it's not.
It's active. It's active. In fact, the loops are powered by the cards to create an inductance field. When a vehicle goes over it, the inductance of the loop changes. That changes what's being measured by the hardware.
I'd be interested in knowing how much radiation on these powered units are actually coming out of the ground.
Yeah, I don't have an exact number for that. All I do know that it's pretty much negligent.
I'd like to keep that in mind for future, that there is the potential for radiation coming from these units, maybe even X-rays. So who knows? I don't know. You don't know. I wouldn't laugh. Why would you laugh? It's not funny. I don't think it's funny, not in this state.
Sure.
Well, those rules belong to Caltrans, so they should be asking that to Caltrans.
Yeah, next question. This is more to ARB, I think. To what extent does ARB use this activity data to aid in the development of inventory models such as MFAC? Maybe I can answer this question. Just for information, record's sake. This, I think, MFAC team, I think Sam and everybody's here in the MFAC team, they're seriously looking into these data sets as we speak right now. Maybe the next version of MFAC model might consider to include this data to validate and do the truck inventory classifications in the model. So that's what it is. We are all looking into it. And maybe once this project is done, the Caltrans project is done, we might have more data, like 90 locations. So that will give us more variations to validate the MFAC model itself. So that's for record. Yeah, thanks. Next question.
Hi, first a comment. I think an API would be wonderful as well. It would, I think it would solve a lot of the issues with getting out different types of data, and you wouldn't have to manage quite so much. So I would certainly love to see an API we could access to pull data. Second thing is, do you have any plans for something that would allow you to identify individual vehicles? Like, obviously you don't have cameras for license plate readers, but are there any plans to be able to do a vehicle identification? That would be really powerful.
I don't think this technology would allow you to identify specific individual vehicles. Obviously, if it's a 18-axle, mega trailer that creates a unique signature, like a heavy, those overload, what do you call that, permit trailers, you could probably identify those.
Right, but if you want to look at emissions, you also need to know something about model year in order to, create something relevant.
There might be potential to get some information on model year, maybe not year by year, but when the model changes significantly. Again, we haven't looked into that actively, but I think there is some potential. I don't know how well we can do it, but it might be worth looking into. Yeah.
This is a follow-up question to the answer provided earlier. If a truck has a container that is carrying a large piece of metal, for example, steel pipes, will this affect the inductive classification signal and result in misclassification? Or is the signal robust to what the truck is carrying and simply something that directs the body shape?
It might, if there's enough mass. So, the caveat is that it's going to be several feet above the ground and above the main chassis of the truck. So it's not going to disturb the inductive signal as much as the chassis of the truck itself.
So how about car? Truck carrying car?
Well, but
They're pretty low.
yes, but those trucks have got such unique signatures. The auto trailers are very, very unique. So we distinguish them right off the bat. And if you think about the auto trailers, there's so much more metal in the chassis of the trailer itself than all the cars it's carrying combined.
Signature and the calculated signature compared.
Sorry.
Repeat the question, sir.
Yeah, sorry.
Calculated signature versus the signature you are getting directly from that. From thousands of values you get, right? From each different vehicles, from your database. From your database, you get thousands of vehicles, right? The values. And what I was wondering is, for a certain type of vehicle, do you have an instantaneous signature compared to the calculated signature?
I'm not sure if I understand the question.
You have a library of data.
We have, the models are trained with a library of data, so to recognize
Okay, you can calculate a signature based on the library of data because you got all the values there. Therefore, you got thousands of vehicles of a single vehicle, for example, and then how it compares with your actual signature you're getting directly from that.
Classifications of vehicles.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Okay, forget about it.
Sorry. Sure. Sorry about that.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I'll just sit down. Yeah, well, I'm part of the INFACT team, so I first want to thank you for this wonderful presentation and your study. Opened up a lot of possibility for us in terms of constructing mobile emission inventories. And my question first, is it with this data available, and apparently you already have designed it, so you first have a system of central valley pathway. So is it part of your Caltrain's vision in future to have deployed statewide and have a network, and meanwhile track the things you can identify by the truck by the signal? Do you plan to in future track the flow of the truck? So since it's continuous network, so from say your current station to next wind station, theoretically you can track the flow and therefore obtain the origin destination. That will be a wonderful network.
That's an excellent question. I'm glad you mentioned that because I almost left it out in my I left it in my presentation. One of the explicit tasks of this project is to investigate tracking trucks across detector locations by the signatures. And we actually, one of our questions, or a really smart monkey here, has actually developed a paper that was presented at TRB on how using a combination of weigh in motion data and inductive signatures, she was able to match trucks over a 30-mile corridor from San Onofre, for those of you who are familiar with San Diego, down towards Leucadia, so closer to the city of San Diego itself. And she was able to match 80% of the trucks that actually drove through that corridor. And bear in mind, this corridor has got interchanges of the State Route 76 and State Route 78, plus other freeway exits. So there is definitely that potential there. Using it without weigh in motion data, then it presents a little bit more of a challenge because obviously the more information you have, the better your tracking accuracies. So we're currently investigating that. We just, in fact, embarked on a data collection effort. We set up cameras on State Route 78, on the I-5, north and south of Oceanside, to find out, if we can track trucks, so that now we are not just finding out where trucks are going with the classification. We know what kind of trucks are going where. In fact, where did I get this information? I think it was you can look at a website. If you pick those locations right around Oceanside, you'll find that enclosed vans tend to drive. The port trucks tend to drive north-south on the I-5, and the enclosed vans have a tendency to more of them tend to go onto the 78 inland towards what is it, Escondido or yeah. So and with the ability to track them, I think that you're right. There's definitely a potential there, and we'd like to implement that if possible.
One extra comment on the data set you used to train the monkey. Have you ever think about the Caltrain's pre-pass program, which vehicle will have to register? So I assume they will have their license plate and type of trucks information. If Caltrain is working with you on this, is it possible to, because once you get that data set, I think that will be very promising.
How would you, I guess I don't.
So you will
be,
it's by pre-pass will just have a shot of the license plate,
Right.
and to use the to join the pre-pass program, the truck fleet has to register
Right.
trucks. So
Right.
provide their truck body type, like what kind of commodity they're carrying, things like that. So
Definitely, if you have license plate information, I believe the vendor, the manufacturer of the Way Motion Systems, IRD, they have a system that does that. They have, I think, a proprietary database of truck configurations by license plate. The caveat is that you can only do that at where you can only get that data at the pre-pass sites where they have the license plates readers and the pre-pass tech readers. Where this one, with this solution, you can expand it to pretty much any existing loop sites. But, there's maybe some potential in we even integrating these two data sources, because at our pre-pass sites, hey, you also have loops. So if you can match these trucks with a known registration and track them to another site, you might be able to get more route information of trucks by industry or configuration.
Thanks for the presentation. You mentioned earlier you're able to distinguish between reefers and other similar classifications. I'm curious how you're able to discern that.
Well, yeah, I was surprised when my student told me she was able to do it. She's now a faculty at the University of Arkansas, but she found that there's a refrigeration tank, the fuel tank for the generator under the van, and that gets picked up by the inductive by the sensor. So there's a little blip there, and it's not 100% accuracy, but I think we've got over 75% accuracy in detecting that unit, and that tells us that it's a refrigeration unit.
Last question.
So excellent presentation, and definitely has a lot of potential for research as well as policy programs. Just a question about taking this research and making into something that can inform the programs. You said you're going to have 90 sites in the future. What would it take to have a complete comprehensive coverage of the state? How many net locations would you have, and what? You also mentioned that it's it's a small incremental cost. It's not that much to add these capabilities. So what would be a reasonable number of stations that you would need to have a statewide coverage, and what would it cost?
Right. So with this 90 locations, the objective was to give a good coverage of the gateways. So we should have all the gateways covered. Trucks leaving the state, whether to Mexico or to Arizona, Oregon, Nevada. We should also probably have enough locations in these 90 deployments to cover most of the interregional cordons. So, like as you can see, we already have pretty much all the freeways covered between LA, San Bernardino, LA and Orange County and San Diego, and so forth. The last challenge that would require even more investments is within the metropolitan areas. Now we're pretty selective. We just pick some of the key ones, but a lot of it is still unimplemented in that regard. And the ideal scenario would be, not to have all these 8,000 or so detectors upgraded to this system. I think that's overkill. But I think it would be neat to have them one between every major freeway interchange. And my ballpark guess would be somewhere between maybe 200 and maybe a total of like 250 to 500 sites. Just a guesstimate. Well, the hardware costs are at least just the equipment alone. We're talking about between $2,000 to $5,000 per location, depending on the number of lanes that you implement. Of course, there are other costs as well. Time, labor, maintenance, and just the running of the system. So there are some. There are going to be other added costs, but just hardware-wise, we're looking about, I think, $3,000 to $5,000 to have them up and running.
Thank you very much for all your wonderful question. Again, I would like to thank Andre for a wonderful presentation. Everybody really liked it and enlightened us. Thank you. Thank you again. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.